I served in the Army for 6 years, stationed at various bases across the United States and overseas. Most of my time was routine training exercises, equipment maintenance, standard military operations. But what happened during a night patrol at Fort Drum in upstate New York still keeps me awake sometimes. This was winter of 2019. I was assigned to security detail, which meant rotating shifts, monitoring the base perimeter. Fort Drum is massive, over 100,000 acres, most of it wilderness training areas surrounded by dense forest. The actual developed part of the base is relatively small compared to all that land. I was on night watch with another soldier, a guy named Martinez. Our shift ran from midnight to 6 a.m. We'd patrol the access roads around the training areas, checking gates, looking for anything unusual. It was boring work, especially in winter, when temperatures dropped below zero and nobody in their right mind would be out there. Around 2:30 in the morning, we were driving one of the outer perimeter roads when our radio started acting up. Static, then complete silence. Martinez tried switching channels, but nothing worked. We figured it was the cold affecting the equipment. It happened sometimes. We decided to complete the patrol route and report the radio issue when we got back. About 10 minutes later, we saw something in our headlights. A figure standing on the side of the road, maybe 50 yards ahead. Martinez slowed the vehicle. We both stared at the figure. It was a person, definitely human-shaped, but they were completely still, just standing there in the middle of nowhere, in sub-zero temperatures, at almost 3 in the morning. We got closer, and I could make out more details. It was a man, wearing what looked like civilian clothes, jeans, and a dark jacket. No hat, no gloves. He was facing away from us, toward the forest. Martinez stopped the vehicle about 20 feet from him. I grabbed the spotlight and aimed it at the figure. He didn't move, didn't react to the light at all. I called out, identified us as military police, told him to turn around and show his hands. No response. The man just stood there, perfectly still. Martinez and I exchanged looks. This wasn't right. No one should be out here, and certainly no one in civilian clothes. This was restricted military property. We both got out of the vehicle, hands on our sidearms. I approached the figure slowly, calling out again. Still no response. When I got about 10 feet away, I could see his breath in the cold air. He was alive, breathing, but not moving at all. I circled around to see his face. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead. His face was pale, lips slightly blue from the cold, but he was breathing, his chest rising and falling slowly. He looked like he was in some kind of trance. I reached out to touch his shoulder, and the moment I made contact, he blinked. Then he turned his head to look at me. His movements were slow, mechanical, like he was waking up from deep sleep. He asked me where he was. His voice was hoarse, confused. I told him he was on Fort Drum, asked him how he got here. He looked around, genuinely bewildered, said he didn't know. Martinez called for backup on his personal cell phone since our radio was still dead. While we waited, I tried to get information from the man. His name was David, something he mumbled his last name and I couldn't quite catch it. He said he lived in Watertown, about 20 miles away. He had no idea how he'd gotten onto the base. He wasn't dressed for the weather, no winter gear at all. He should have been hypothermic, but aside from being cold, he seemed relatively okay. He kept saying he'd been at home, watching TV, and then suddenly he was here. Backup arrived about 15 minutes later, 2 more MPs and a medic. They took the man into custody and transported him to the base hospital for evaluation. Martinez and I filed our report and finished our patrol. The next day, I followed up on what had happened. The man, David, had been treated for mild hypothermia and released to civilian authorities. But here's what bothered me. They checked the security gate logs. There was no record of anyone matching his description entering the base that night. The gates are monitored 24/7 with cameras. No one had walked in, driven in, or otherwise entered through any official access point. They searched the perimeter fence in the area where we found him. No cuts, no gaps, no signs of anyone climbing over. The fence is 12 feet high with razor wire. It would be extremely difficult to get over without leaving evidence. The civilian police in Watertown confirmed that David had been reported missing by his wife around midnight. She said he'd gone to bed around 11, and when she woke up at midnight to use the bathroom, He was gone. His car was still in the driveway. The front door was unlocked, but there was no sign of struggle or forced exit. David himself had no memory of leaving his house, or how he traveled 20 miles to end up deep inside a military installation. Medical evaluation found no drugs or alcohol in his system, no head trauma, no signs of mental illness. The official explanation was sleepwalking, though no one could explain how a sleepwalker could travel 20 miles, bypass security gates and cameras, and get through or over a 12-foot razor wire fence without injury. But that's not what really bothers me. What bothers me is what Martinez told me a few days later. He said that after we'd found David and called for backup, while we were waiting, he'd seen something, movement in the tree line, maybe 30 yards from where David had been standing. Multiple shapes moving between the trees, watching us. He hadn't said anything at the time because our radio was dead and backup was already coming. But he was certain he'd seen people in the woods, at least 3 or 4 of them, staying just out of sight. We went back to that location during daylight. With a small team, we searched the woods thoroughly. We found footprints in the snow, multiple sets, leading deeper into the forest. We followed them for about a mile before they just stopped. Not at a road, not at a clearing, they just ended in the middle of the woods, like whoever made them had simply vanished. The investigation was quietly closed. No official conclusion, just filed away as an unexplained incident. David was banned from the base and told not to discuss what happened. I finished my patrol rotation and rotated to a different assignment, but I never forgot that night. The image of David standing there, perfectly still, in freezing temperatures, miles from where he should have been, and the footprints in the snow that led nowhere. I've heard stories from other soldiers who've done security duty at Fort Drum, strange things in the training areas, people who shouldn't be there, lights in the forest at night. Most of it gets dismissed as wildlife, weather phenomena, or tired soldiers imagining things. But I know what I saw, and I know what Martinez saw. And I know that sometimes the scariest thing about being in the military isn't the enemy you're trained to fight. It's the things that happen in the spaces between, the incidents that don't make it into official reports, the questions that no one wants to answer. I got out of the army 2 years ago. I work private security now, daytime shifts only, and I never, ever volunteer for night patrol. I was stationed at a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan in 2017. Our unit was responsible for security operations in a rural province, working with local forces and conducting patrols. The base itself was relatively small, maybe 200 personnel, built around an old Soviet-era compound that had been abandoned for decades. The main compound had several buildings that were still structurally sound enough to use. We'd set up our command center, barracks, and operations in these buildings. But there was one building we were specifically ordered not to enter, Building 7, as it was marked on the base map. Building 7 sat at the far corner of the compound, separated from the other structures by about 50 yards of open ground. It was 3 stories tall, concrete construction, windows mostly blown out or boarded up. The official reason we were told to stay out was structural instability. The building had taken damage during previous conflicts and wasn't safe, but everyone had stories about Building 7. The local Afghan forces who worked with us refused to go near it. They said it was cursed, that bad things happened there during the Soviet occupation. Some of the older soldiers in our unit who'd been on previous deployments to this base had their own stories. Strange sounds at night, lights in windows that shouldn't have power, a general feeling that something was wrong with that building. I didn't believe in curses or ghosts. I'd been in combat, seen real threats, real danger. A superstition about an old building didn't concern me. But after what happened, I understand why those warnings existed. It was late October, about 3 months into our deployment. I was on guard duty one night, posted on the perimeter wall that overlooked the compound. My shift was midnight to 4 a.m. It was a clear night, cold, but not uncomfortable, with enough moonlight to see pretty well. Around 1:30, I noticed something strange. There was light coming from an action, one of the upper windows of Building 7. Not bright, just a dim flickering glow, like a flashlight or candle moving around inside. I radioed it in to the duty officer. He said he'd send someone to check it out. About 10 minutes later, I saw two soldiers approach the building from the main compound. They stopped at the entrance, seemed to be discussing something. Then one of them went inside while the other waited outside. A few minutes passed. Then the soldier who was waiting outside started talking into his radio. Even from my position on the wall, I could tell something was wrong by his body language. He was gesturing, looking agitated. The duty officer came over the radio and asked for my position. I told him I was on the north wall, could see Building 7 clearly. He told me to keep watching and report anything unusual. The soldier outside the building was joined by two more personnel, including what looked like a sergeant. They were all looking up at the building, pointing at something. I followed their line of sight and saw the light again, moving between windows on the second floor. Then the soldier who'd gone inside came out. Even from a distance, I could tell he was moving fast, almost running. He was talking to the others, gesturing back at the building. After a brief conversation, all four of them returned to the main compound. The duty officer came back on the radio. He told me to maintain my post and keep observing Building 7. He said they were sending an officer to investigate properly in the morning, but for now, no one else was to approach it. I spent the rest of my shift watching that building. The light appeared twice more, always on the second floor, moving from window to window. But here's what bothered me. Building 7 had no electricity. The power lines had been cut when we secured the compound. There was no generator, no solar panels, no power source of any kind. When my shift ended at 4 a.m., I was debriefed by the duty officer. He asked me detailed questions about what I'd seen, what time, how long, which windows. He seemed concerned but didn't share any information about what the soldier had found inside. Later that day, I ran into the soldier who'd gone into Building 7. His name was Cooper, a specialist from Texas. I asked him what he'd seen. He was quiet for a moment, then said he didn't want to talk about it. I pressed him, and he finally told me. He said when he entered the building, he'd used his flashlight to navigate. The ground floor was empty, just debris and abandoned equipment. He went up to the second floor, following standard clearing procedures. That's when he heard it. Voices. Multiple voices, speaking in a language he didn't recognize. Not Pashto or Dari, the local languages he'd become familiar with. Something else, something older sounding. He'd followed the sound to a room at the far end of the hallway. The door was closed. He announced himself in English, and Pashto told whoever was inside to come out. The voices stopped immediately. He opened the door. The room was empty, completely empty. No people, no equipment, nothing. Just bare concrete walls and floor. But in the center of the room, drawn on the floor in what looked like charcoal or ash, was a symbol, a circle with strange markings inside it, symbols he didn't recognize. He'd immediately backed out of the room and left the building. That's when I'd seen him practically running across the compound. An officer and a team went into Building 7 the next morning with full documentation equipment. They found the symbol Cooper had described, took photos, and collected samples of the material used to draw it. They searched the entire building, but found no evidence of anyone being there recently. No footprints in the dust, no disturbed debris, nothing. The symbol was sent to intelligence for analysis. A few days later, we got word back. It matched symbols found in other Soviet-era buildings across Afghanistan, usually in places where interrogations and detentions had occurred. The current theory was that it was some kind of marking system the Soviets had used, though no one could definitively say what it meant. Building 7 was officially declared off-limits with no exceptions. The entrances were sealed with steel plates. New orders came down. Anyone seen near the building for any reason would face disciplinary action. But that didn't stop the incidents. Over the next few months, soldiers reported seeing lights in the building regularly. The Afghan workers who maintained our base refused to work after dark, saying they heard sounds coming from Building 7, voices, banging, sometimes screaming. One soldier swore he saw a figure in one of the upper windows, watching the compound. Another reported that his camera equipment malfunctioned every time he tried to photograph the building, even though it worked fine everywhere else. I completed my deployment and rotated home in early 2018. Before I left, I learned something that made everything more disturbing. I was talking to one of the intelligence officers, asking about the history of the base. He told me that during the Soviet occupation, Building 7 had been used as a detention and interrogation facility. Dozens, maybe hundreds of people had been held there. Many of them never left. When the Soviets abandoned the base in the late 1982, Building 7 was left exactly as it was. No records were kept of who'd been held there or what had happened to them. The building had remained empty and untouched for nearly 30 years before we arrived. I asked about the symbol we'd found. He said they'd identified similar markings at other former Soviet sites, always in rooms where interrogations had taken place. The working theory was that they were psychological tools, symbols meant to intimidate or confuse detainees. But some researchers believed they had religious or occult significance, that Soviet interrogators had experimented with various methods of psychological manipulation. I don't know what was really happening in Building 7. I don't know if the lights and sounds had natural explanations, if they were caused by local civilians trying to scare us, or if something else was going on. What I do know is that I stood on that wall and watched lights move through a building that had no power. I know that Cooper found a symbol in an empty room where he'd heard voices. And I know that every person who worked on that base, from American soldiers to Afghan contractors, agreed that Building 7 was a place to avoid. I'm out of the military now. But sometimes I think about that building, sitting in that compound, waiting for the next group of soldiers to arrive, and I wonder what they'll find when they go inside. I deployed to Iraq in 2015 as part of a logistics support unit. My job was driving supply trucks between bases, usually in convoys of 4 to 6 vehicles. It was dangerous work, IEDs, ambushes, accidents, but it was also routine. You followed procedures, stayed alert, and most of the time, you made it to your destination without incident. What happened on Highway 1 outside of Ramadi changed how I thought about danger. It showed me that sometimes the worst threats aren't the ones you're trained to expect. It was early September, still brutally hot during the day. Our convoy was transporting supplies from Camp Takadum to a smaller outpost about 40 kilometers north. 6 vehicles total, 4 transport trucks and 2 gun trucks for security. Standard procedure. We left at 0400 hours, aiming to complete the run before the heat became unbearable. The route was designated as relatively secure, not safe. Nowhere in Iraq was truly safe, but this road had been quiet for several weeks. I was driving the 3rd truck in line. My TC, truck commander, was a sergeant named Williams. He'd been in country for almost a year and knew the routes well. We had a good system. He watched for threats. I focused on driving and maintaining position in the convoy. About 30 minutes into the drive, just after sunrise, Williams told me to slow down. The lead vehicle had spotted something on the road ahead, and the convoy was stopping to investigate. We all halted, maintaining spacing between vehicles. I could see the lead truck about 100 meters ahead, the crew dismounting to check something. Williams got on the radio to find out what was going on. The report came back. There was a vehicle blocking the road, a civilian car, looked abandoned, sitting sideways across both lanes. The lead truck commander was trying to decide whether to push it aside or find an alternate route. This was always a difficult call. An abandoned vehicle could be rigged with explosives, used as bait for an ambush. But going off-road could lead you into areas that hadn't been swept for IEDs. Either option was risky. After a few minutes of discussion, the decision was made to push the vehicle aside using the lead gun truck. We all stayed in our vehicles, engines running, ready to move quickly if something went wrong. The gun truck approached the abandoned car slowly. Through my side mirror, I watched as they positioned their bumper against the car's rear quarter panel. Then they started pushing. The car moved easily, too easily. It rolled off the road and into the ditch like it was in neutral with no parking brake. That should have been our first warning that something was wrong. The convoy started moving again. We passed the abandoned car. It was an old sedan, probably 10 or 15 years old, covered in dust. No visible damage, no signs of why it had been left there. We continued north. Everything seemed normal for about 10 minutes. Then Williams said something that made my blood run cold. He said there was a vehicle following us. About 500 meters back, matching our speed exactly. I checked my mirrors. There was definitely something there, but at that distance, and with the dust, I couldn't make out details. I asked if it was military. Williams said he couldn't tell. We radioed the lead vehicle. They confirmed they were aware of the follower and were monitoring it. Standard protocol was to let vehicles pass if they wanted to, but this one wasn't trying to pass. It was just following, maintaining that exact distance. Another 5 minutes passed. The vehicle was still there, still keeping that precise spacing. Then Williams noticed something else. The vehicle looked familiar. He grabbed the binoculars and took a closer look. It was the same sedan, the one we'd pushed off the road 20 minutes earlier. Same color, same model, same dust pattern on the windows. That was impossible. There was only one road. We'd just come from that direction. For that car to be behind us, it would have had to somehow gotten ahead of us and turned around. But we'd been watching our rear the entire time. There'd been no opportunity for any vehicle to overtake the convoy. Williams reported this to the lead vehicle. There was a long pause before they responded. They confirmed they were seeing the same thing, a vehicle matching the description of the abandoned car, following at a fixed distance. The convoy commander made a decision. We were going to speed up and try to lose the follower. If it kept pace, we'd know for certain something was wrong. We accelerated to about 80 kilometers per hour, faster than was really safe on that road. I watched my mirror. The vehicle behind us accelerated too, maintaining that same 500-meter gap. We slowed down to 60. It slowed down. We were being shadowed, deliberately and precisely. The convoy commander got on the radio. He said we were going to stop at the next intersection, where there was a military checkpoint. We'd report the situation and let them deal with the follower. The checkpoint was about 5 kilometers ahead. We covered the distance quickly and pulled into the fortified position. Iraqi army soldiers manned the checkpoint, along with a few American advisors. We all dismounted and turned to watch the road behind us. The vehicle was still there, stopped about 500 meters down the road, just sitting there, engine presumably running, not moving. Williams and I walked over to where the convoy commander was talking with the checkpoint commander. They were discussing whether to send a patrol to investigate the vehicle. While they talked, I kept my eyes on the sedan. It just sat there, motionless. But then something changed. The driver's door opened. Someone got out. A figure, too far away to see clearly. They stood next to the car for a moment, facing our direction. Then they reached back into the car, pulled something out, and held it up. Williams had the binoculars. He looked, then went completely still. I asked him what it was. He handed me the binoculars without saying anything. I looked. The figure was holding a sign, a piece of cardboard or similar material with writing on it. The letters were large enough to read even at that distance. 2 words, turn back. Before anyone could react, the figure got back in the car, closed the door, and the vehicle drove away. Not toward us, not turning around. It just backed up, straight backward down the highway, faster than seemed possible, until it disappeared from view. We reported everything to the checkpoint commander. He sent a patrol to investigate, but they found nothing. No sign of the vehicle, no tire tracks, nothing to indicate any car had been there at all. The convoy commander made the call to proceed with our mission. We had supplies that were needed, and sitting at the checkpoint wasn't accomplishing anything. But he changed our route, taking a longer alternate road that added an hour to our trip. We completed the delivery without further incident, but the story spread quickly through our unit. Other drivers started reporting similar experiences, vehicles that followed their convoys, maintaining impossible precision. Always the same, staying exactly 500 meters back, matching speed perfectly, disappearing when confronted. One convoy reported that their follower had been an SUV that they'd seen burned out on the roadside earlier in the trip. Another said it was a truck they'd passed going the opposite direction, yet somehow it ended up behind them. Command took the report seriously enough to brief us on proper procedures if it happened again. They never acknowledged what the phenomenon was officially. They attributed it to coincidence, misidentification, stress of deployment causing shared hallucinations. But those of us who experienced it knew better. We knew that something was happening on those roads that couldn't be explained by standard logic. I finished my deployment and came home in early 2016. I don't drive trucks anymore. I work warehouse logistics now. Never leave the building. Some people might think that's a step down, less prestigious than military service, but I'm fine with it, because I remember watching that figure hold up that sign. 2 words that probably saved our convoy from whatever was waiting for us on our original route. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't turned back. I don't know what that vehicle was, or why it followed us. And honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that sometimes in war, the enemy isn't the only thing you need to fear. Sometimes there are other forces at play, things that don't fit into briefings or tactical assessments, things that follow you down empty roads and try to warn you away from danger you can't see coming. And sometimes, if you're smart, you listen.